Good evening. Thank you for coming. Happy Easter. I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you so much for coming to our third program in our four-part Easter series, Revitalizing Our Church. The first Easter series was Revitalizing Our Church, Ideas from the Catholic Press. The second one was Revitalizing Our Church, Ideas from University Presidents. And tonight, we have Revitalizing Our Church, Professors in the Pews. We're so glad that you could make it and grateful that you could be a part of this conversation tonight. So we have three Boston College professors that are not only very popular in the classroom, but they are also parents, and they are also very active in their church. I could probably spend the next 10 minutes just kind of chronicling their academic achievements. I won't do that. You have a one-sheeter that will tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds. But I do want to thank Hofstmann Espino, who is a professor in the School of Theology and Ministry, Kristen Heyer, who is a professor in the theology department, and also Michael Pratt, who's a professor in the Carroll School of Management, for being with us this evening. I asked them if they could tell us something that we might not know about them. So as you can tell by your one-sheeter, we know that Hofstmann Espino loves Marvel comics. Yes. I asked him when he walked in if he saw the Avenger movie this weekend. Kristen Heyer, she most recently had an audience with Pope Francis. And Mike Pratt, he's a daredevil. He flew out of a plane twice voluntarily. So there's a little crazy side to him, but that's all good.
That's amazing.
With a parish, of course. And yes, and it opened, which is important as well. I just want to offer one housekeeping note. We have cards when you came in. You can ask a question. At 7:45 this evening, we'll have one of our staff members come down the aisle, and if you can just pass your cards over to this side of the aisle, and then we'll try to take as many questions as possible. We do listen to your emails. A couple of people that have participated in this series before had mentioned they want more audience questions, so we'll definitely do that this evening. Let's get started, but before we do so, I'd like us to stand in prayer and recite the Our Father. I'd like to pray for our church, but I'd also like to pray for all the houses of worship and for all the victims and the people that are being, terrorized with violence. So together, as Catholics. Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so let's get started. This is an open-ended question for all three of you. So can you reflect on the state of Catholicism in the United States, both as a professor and then also a member of your parish? Where we're at right now. Hofstmann?
Sure, Karen. I think that the best way to describe the church in the United States of America right now is a church in transition. It's a church that is changing in many ways, demographically, culturally. It's changing also spiritually. We see many demographic transformations. The church of the 1950s, 1940s was primarily a church that had settled after many decades of migration in this country. But then, since the 1960s, we have seen a whole new renewal in transformation in parishes, dioceses, communities, and new voices, new languages, new ways of being Catholic are injecting new life. But on the other hand, that transition means that certain ways of being Catholic are passing away. Certain ways of being Catholic are being left behind, And then in that process, what I notice is a little bit of tension. The tension between the old and the new, the tension between those things that have been and we got used to them, and those that are new and are bringing innovation and somehow alter the order of things. So, but it's exciting. This is a time in which we are a little bit of an in-between. We are transitioning into something new. I mean, there are parts of the country where we can say we already get a glimpse of the new, for instance, in the South and the West, no? And there's a little bit of the old that remains, and it's also, that old also has a sense of newness. So I don't know exactly where we are going, but we're moving into something interesting.
I want to talk to you more about that in just a little bit. We'll dig a little bit deeper. Based off of some of the turmoil that the church has faced as of late, thoughts on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the church in the United States definitely has been rocked by scandals, unfortunately, and by certain dynamics, that affect the growth and the way of being vibrant communities and vibrant people. And what is unfortunate is that many people are choosing to leave. Many people are being disappointed, and rightly so, because of many of our perhaps inadequate structures and inadequate ways of dealing with really important realities that are affecting real lives. And but on the other hand, I also want to pay attention to the people who are staying, the people who decide to stay for many reasons. And maybe I'll talk later on about especially those new groups that are injecting life into the church. But yes, I mean, it is a time of turmoil for many Catholics, but it's also a time of hope. I tend to see life, a little bit of the glass half full, half empty. So I want to balance out my assessment of the church in this country.
And Easter is about hope.
Amen.
So, Kristen.
Thank you, and thanks for having us this evening. Did you say the mic is not on?
There it is.
Is that better? I think it's on. Do I just need to project more? Is that any better? I'll move it up. Yeah. I think I would echo some of Osman's assessments in terms of this in-between period. I do think we see this time of transition in the Catholic Church in this country. You asked in terms of our classrooms and in terms of our parish experiences. I think in terms of the country, the turmoil, as you said, is reflected in some choices to exit, but in many kind of digging in their heels, saying this is my church too, and I'm mourning, but I'm here for the struggle. I think in some ways our church has reflected or absorbed some of the ideological polarizations that reflect wider society. So there's ways in which, unfortunately, even an abuse crisis can become weaponized in some of those battles. But I find a lot of hope at the parish and classroom level, maybe to echo you as well, the glass half full. I think I have in my classroom lay ecclesial ministers, Jesuits, young undergrads who are choosing to stay, choosing to ask really difficult questions. I think it's not an uncomplicated time to give your life to graduate work in Catholic theology or in ministry, and I find a lot of hope there. Same with my parish. I think I find a lot of hope in the people showing up week after week just across the way at St. Ignatius Parish, not in blindly compliant way. We've had a lot of, I think, courageous preaching. We've had a lot of honest programming. We've had even symbolic gestures. Our Advent wreath down in the family mass in the Landon Chapel did not form a complete circle this Advent in December. And so each week the celebrant would signal how things aren't kind of in a neat unity right now in Roman Catholicism. So I think there's been an eyes wide open engagement of the challenges facing our church, both in the parish level and in the classroom level. And I think both of those give me a lot of hope, even amidst a very difficult time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mike?
So as an organizational behavior or business school professor, I kind of see the issues in the Catholic Church very organizationally. So on the one hand, we have a lot of demographic changes happening, but at the same time, we have a 2,000-year-old plus bureaucracy that's trying to change in the midst of a crisis. And change is tough for any organization. I do some work with companies, and organizations at minimum, if you want to make a culture change, is going to be 2 to 3 years, and that's for organizations that are 100 years old. Mm-hmm. Imagine organizations that's thousands of years old. So it's a challenge. It's a big ship to steer. I also see it as a time where there's still, I think, some goodwill left, but unfortunately, I think it's being squandered. I think to make change in any institution, you need to have trust. You need to have goodwill. And I think what I have seen, again, from an organizational perspective, the multiple crises facing the church is damaging. I think there's been very little from the church about what they've done. And in fact, the church has actually responded to some of these crises. Reports, for example, of sex abuse has plummeted since they've instituted the Dallas Charter. But even though we've done something, so in addition to kind of advertising or saying more about what we've done, I do think at present the changes have all been very piecemeal, been very policy-oriented, and really haven't looked at the deeper issues of culture change and changes in leadership. Mm-hmm. At a parish level, I would characterize it as ambivalence. At some level, I think people are hopeful. I think people get a lot of meaning out of going to church, attending church. But at the same time, people, I think, are rightfully frustrated. This is supposed to be our moral center, and when you hear all these things about immorality coming from that moral center, it's pretty disruptive and pretty damaging.
So I'm sure many people have asked you, because you're professors and you're with young people all the time. And probably more so, Kristen and Hofsman, having discussions about the church, maybe not so much, Mike, but you have 3 high school, kids in high school, so we're having these discussions. People will say, what are the students thinking? What are the young people thinking? Can you just make a quick comment? I want to be mindful that as our conversation continues tonight, that we're really using our words to form ideas to move forward, and that we can glean some good ideas and direction so we can help the church. But I'm just curious, what are the students saying?
Well, something that I find fascinating, Karen, is that I see at the School of Theology and Ministry here at Boston College an army of 24, 25, 26-year-olds who want to dedicate their lives to ministry in an institution that seems to be in flames. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's like the firefighters, in many ways. They got great ideas, and that inspires me. It's just, when I ask some of the students, why do you want to be a minister, a lay ecclesial minister? When I ask some of the Jesuits or some of the men who are preparing for ministry or some of the women who are vowed religious, why do you want to stay in the church? Why do you want to study ministry? Look at how the church is. And they just want to move forward. They got great ideas. They wanna teach theology. They wanna make a difference. They wanna commit to social justice. And to me, that is very inspiring. Now, it is not, as you were saying, Kristen, that they don't have questions or that they are not asking the hard questions, and they are very critical. As a matter of fact, they are asking questions that sometimes the institution is not ready to answer with convincing responses or convincing ways forward. However, these young women and men understand, and with them, and actually I am with them, that the church is not only the institution or only the clergy or only the theology professors, but it's all the body of the baptized, And just as I am inspired by them, they are inspired by women working, in shelters, people doing missionary work, teachers in Catholic schools. And I think that this is the cycle that we need to start cultivating, in which we see especially young people committed to the values that have informed Christianity for almost 2,000 years.
You said that these students have great ideas. I'm not going to put you on the spot right now, but I will in about 2 minutes. Give me a great idea.
Absolutely.
Kristen?
Sure. In terms of the students, I was a teaching assistant here in 2001, 2002 for the Pulse program. And so I was thinking about that kind of wave of revelations. And I would say my students that year were much more blindsided by what abuse revelations really meant for everything they held dear, everything their parents and their grandparents held dear. You might remember the press were parked out across the street at Ground Zero. But today, my undergrads have grown up in that subsequent era, right? They've seen Spotlight. So this is what they've known. So I found in the fall, in the wake of the Pennsylvania grand jury report, my undergrads were really hungry to talk honestly in class about the revelations. I found them hungry to talk about the abuse crisis in ways that was honest about the depth of damage, and yet I found them really open to understanding how to remain Catholic with integrity. So it was different than last time for understandable reasons, but I think there was an important kind of middle ground, not unlike Houseman was saying earlier. And I agree in terms of the graduate students. So I'm teaching a new course, a graduate seminar right now on moral agency, and I've been really struck how week after week students have been willing to connect kind of theoretical texts to concrete implications in terms of what's happening in the institutional church today, whether we're looking at justice and forgiveness or agency and power, conscience. I think there's been a real hunger not only to make those textual connections, but some pretty honest self-examination. So again, accompanying those students has really been a source of hope for me in a rather dark time.
Mike, I want to get to you in just a minute. Hofstad, back to you. An idea?
For instance, great ideas that come from graduate students studying theology and ministry to start a new nonprofit, serving homeless people. Start a nonprofit organization or go and work for a nonprofit organization that organizes people to advocate for just migration reform. I have heard
Do a lot with prison ministry too.
absolutely
Yeah.
prison ministry. Another great idea that I heard from some of the students working with women who are victims of domestic violence. So in many ways, these great ideas are kind of expanding the idea of being church beyond the walls of our own churches, So they are not, certainly some of them are looking at how to do better parish life and parish ministry, but many of them are taking the church out into the peripheries, as Pope Francis is telling us.
Mm-hmm. Mike, 3 kids in high school.
I'm looking out in the audience, and so I'm in the sandwich generation, and I think most of you are pieces of bread. In the sense of I have 3 high schoolers, senior, junior, and a freshman, and they've all been born after 2000 or later. So the crisis is actually, they've only known the church in the crisis. And I think like many millennials and Generation Z, we're finding in general that the kids are not as attached to institutions as they used to be. So I think my struggle as a parent has been much more about overcoming cynicism and apathy, not so much about disappointment. So it's a slightly different challenge. At the same time, I have parents who are still around, and I think some people write off their generation as yes father generation. Mm-hmm. And I just had a talk with my mother yesterday, and I was saying I'm going to do this talk. She said, we have to talk about doing this, make this change. We should talk about having women priests. We should talk about getting rid of celibacy. We should talk about this. And she just went on and on about all the ideas she had about how to make the church better. And she and my people of our generation, my aunts, my uncles, my parents, still go to church, weekly, if not more. They're still very involved in the church. But I think that's another wellspring of potential agents for change that I think perhaps we're not thinking about.
If I could say something about what you just said, Mike, I believe that the younger generations has much better ecclesiology than the older generation, because they are not looking that much inwards. They're looking, as I was saying earlier, outwards. But also, I want to also point out to the fact that just as many Euro-American white, young Catholics kind of grew up with the burden of the scandal, sexual abuse scandal and so forth, we are also looking at a whole new generation of Catholics who are, in this country who are Hispanic, children of immigrants from Africa and from Asia, who did not have to deal with those scandals with their families, and for them, they are wrestling with the different questions, and most of them, especially in the work that I'm doing and research that I'm doing, some of the questions is, does the Catholic Church really want us here? It's the question of belonging more than the question of the scandal.
Yeah,
I say yes, yes, we want you.
Absolutely.
I think the important thing is not to consider any generation or group of people as homogeneous.
Absolutely.
And I think we tend to block people into certain groups and say, these people think this way, and I just think that's not a productive way to think about it.
And maybe that's the change too, the openness that we're seeing from, especially with our young people. That's such a blessing, Okay, so how can professors in higher education, Catholic higher education specifically, revitalize the church? Thoughts on that?
Sure, I'll start. I do think Catholic universities are well poised to bring interdisciplinary scholarly resources to this crisis in the church. So you have 3 disciplines kind of represented here tonight, right? We could add our colleagues in social work and psychology and law and history in terms of bringing scholarly interdisciplinary resources. But beyond that, I really think professors could engage more outside of the ivory towers. So I think when a crisis like this arises, it's pretty important to make space, make time to give more public lectures, to write more accessible blogs, or some of my colleagues have been doing podcasts lately, to bring our scholarly expertise to bear on this question. So just a couple of examples from colleagues in my department alone. I would say I have a colleague in ecclesiology, Rick Gallardi, who's been bringing his own expertise on church authority, models of priestly formation to bear on the crisis. Colleagues of mine in ethics, Lisa Cahill, has been giving talks on Catholic sexual ethics, the role of toxic masculinity in the crisis. Kathy Caveney also has a law degree, so what do insights from bankruptcy law have to say in light of RICO charges and that have been brought to bear? My colleague Steve Pope has brought some of his work in restorative justice to bear on perhaps a victim-centered solution to bridging and forming reconciliation in light of this. I also think we could use our scholarly guilds to help approach the issues arising out of this crisis. So I've been on this past year a presidential commission out of the Catholic Theological Society of America, just one of our guilds, but it's the world's largest association of Catholic theologians, trying to think, we've been meeting monthly, what recommendations could we bring to our guild so that it's not just a couple of topical panels at our upcoming annual meeting and then back to business as usual, but guild suggestions that could affect lasting change.
Was that the connection to the meeting with Pope Francis?
It is not. See, I have no cool hobbies like skydiving or Marvel comics. You should have gone with
But you got to meet the Pope.
Yeah, no, it's... Anyhow, I do think guilds, especially in terms of how they structure knowledge production, right? If we made some kind of permanent consultations that could help structure knowledge productions. One of my colleagues here, Elizabeth Antis, suggested that our CTSA do a permanent, for the foreseeable future, consultation on sexual violence and the Catholic Church theology, sexual violence and sexuality, to say, look, this is a really important issue, the clergy sexual abuse crisis, but also that tends to generate scholarly knowledge in the years to come when you create structures within our scholarly guilds.
Mm-hmm. And also forming bridges with other professors that don't live in the theology bubble.
That's right.
But engaging them in conversation, or come and be part of this lunch, or join me for this, or it just takes invitation.
I think that's exactly right. I think so for this consultation, for instance, she proposed having other disciplines, like I was saying earlier, but also could we have survivals or victims advocates there? Could we have legal scholars there? Ways in which to broaden the conversation and really listen to people already affected, but also generate new reflection and new knowledge.
Yeah, really thoughtful. Thank you for that. Mike, over at the Carroll School of Management.
That's a transition for the not in the ethics and religious group. Yes, I got it.
No, lots of ethics, lots of ethics in Carroll School of Management.
So I think there's at least 3 ways that professors can be involved. I think the first is stay teaching in Catholic colleges and universities. I mean, rather than, there are other options.
Yeah.
And the speaker at the presidential panel said, we educate about, I think I got this right, about 10% of all college-age Catholics we educate. They go on to become 40% of the active Catholics.
That's right.
And contribute 70% to their parishes
I
with
know.
their money. So that as a return on investment, that's pretty good. So I would say, so number 1, just continue doing what you're doing. Number 2, get involved in, I think, both local and more national, international organizations. Personally, I'm involved in St. Ignatius. I've been involved with their faith formation, on parish council, and other arts-based programs. So, I think getting involved there because, for the parish council, I was asked to be on in part because, I teach negotiations, conflict management. I have some idea how organizations run, and so offering the skills that you have. This is where getting outside of your departments. I've been involved, a lot. BC does a ton of stuff. I think my actually first exposure to Boston College before I was even hired was shortly after the sex abuse scandal broke in Boston, and it brought together Catholic clergy and business schools professors about how do you deal with crisis. I could say at the time there was not a ton of enthusiasm for that, the clerical side on that. But a couple months ago in February, I was at a leadership roundtable that got together cardinals and other kind of Catholic thought leaders before they were going to talk, before the big meeting with Pope Francis. I thought people were much more receptive to listening to lay leaders and people such as that. But BC's had like the BC Roundtable, the School of Theology and Campus Outreach. They've done a lot of retreats, a lot of ways to kind of get involved with the students. So getting involved outside of your department. I think the third thing, just more generally, is try to figure out where do your skills essentially fit the weaknesses of the church. So I don't know a lot about seminarian training, but I'm pretty sure I have a good friend who's a priest. They don't talk a lot about how to run businesses. They don't talk a lot about budgets. They don't talk a lot about other things beyond, because again, if you think about only a limited number of years, they can't go into all the things that go into running a parish. You should know some social work. You should know some psychology. You should know some business. And it's just difficult to do all that at the same time. So reaching out to people and helping out, lending your skills in areas where people are currently not either well-informed or maybe need some help.
The Church in the 21st Century Center, we have a steering committee and an advisory committee, and I did want to thank the 3 professors here because they all serve on our advisory committee and steering committee. And I mean, chances are my universe, crosses with Kristen and Huffsman, but I would probably never have the chance to meet Mike. And through our work for the church, have formed, a great partnership. So again, to your point, I think it's really important to get out and to invite and to talk and have those kinds of conversations. And like you said, Mike, bring your gifts. Huffsman?
Yes. One image that comes to my mind comes from Pope Francis, who says, and this is returning to the world of theology, in which he invites theologians not to be armchair theologians, which is kind of his way of looking at the image of the ivory tower scholar. And I believe that, that invitation to go out is very important. And the one nuance that I would make to that is that college professors, Catholic university professors, should be bridges, bridges between what's happening in these worlds of economics, social work, law, all the scholarly work that we do and that wisdom, and then bring it to not only the churches, but also to the larger society, infused by the Catholic values, you know? I mean, it would be great to, at some point down the road, to listen to a mathematician teaching, or a physics scholar, or a chemist, you know, here at Boston College, you know, who is Roman Catholic, and say, this is how I bridge, you know, the wisdom that I'm learning, you know, in my community. The second point that I would say is, and I mean, echoing Kristen and Mike's thoughts, we all need to bring our strengths. And sometimes, I heard this from a theologian, you know, who once said, sometimes we academics think that we have outgrown the church, you know. And that's a temptation. That is a temptation, especially as theologians. And when I say the church, the institution. But I think that we also need a little bit of humility. And in that humility, and I, you know, pretty much echoing Kristen's thoughts, you know, I mean, for instance, my wife and I do ministry at St. Patrick Parish in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is the poorest city of New England. And when I go to the parish, half of the people don't even know that I teach at a Catholic university. They don't even know that I'm a theologian. Some people ask me, in what factory do you work? You know, some people ask me, what do you do for a living? And I teach catechesis. I help with adult faith formation. I help with RCIA, and I'm a regular parishioner in my community. And I think that, but in being a regular parishioner, in many ways, I also bring a lot of the wisdom that I learned as a theologian. So that sense of humility that, you know, that is necessary, you know, is great. And the third piece, you know, since you spoke in threes, I like threes as well, Mike, you know. So the third piece is that I think that as professors in Catholic colleges and universities, we can do a lot of healing in terms of, you know, breaking away that mistrust that exists sometimes between the hierarchy and especially theologians or professors in Catholic colleges and universities. It is really painful, to be honest with you, when sometimes I hear bishops saying, oh, I don't want professors from that school, or I don't want to deal with theologians from that university or from that order. Or the other way around, theologians or scholars who say, I don't deal with this bishop or this priest or this particular community. And I think that we should, you know, in many ways, embrace what, you know, Clement of Alexandria, you know, he used the image of Jesus, the teacher, as a healer, you know, and we can do much healing in our faith communities.
Very true, very true. Kristen, so your area of study is obviously theological ethics, and obviously the moral authority of the church has suffered. And so what do you think, and again, Mike, chime in on this, what do you think the church needs to do to restore its credibility and really, you know, bring back those that are saying, I'm leaving?
Yeah. Well, I do think you're right that repairing this damaged sense of trust, I think Mike mentioned that too, is this other larger scandal, this ongoing scandal. I think the enduring damage to that trust that forms of unaccountable power have wreaked are what we're dealing with right now when we think about restoring moral authority. I think, you know, Ofsman mentioned the image of Pope Francis of going to the peripheries. I think this image that actually, I think it was the days before the papal election that Bergoglio mentioned this idea of the church needs to go out to the peripheries lest she becomes self-referential and get sick. And I think that tendency seems relevant to the dynamics that we're seeing today. So I wonder if it's the church itself in need of a field hospital right now, that we could ask what this image of going to the periphery is, what this image of church as field hospital could teach us for restoring trust. Mm-hmm. So I think that would mean a couple of things. The church taking its powerful teachings about justice for the vulnerable or about power sharing that it's longstanding social teaching and that this papacy have commended to economic powers, to political powers, and kind of turning those inward. So I think taking seriously accompaniment at the peripheries right now for our church would reframe its primary concern. It would reframe our focus not just on optics in terms of preserving the institution in a time of scandal, but would center victims of abuse. It would center outraged parents, maybe women more broadly, or maybe even these people who are leaving the church, to whom we may have something, from whom we may have something to learn. So I think in terms of what impedes a church as field hospital model, I know, I think Mike is well poised to talk about power. And I think harmful notions of power that need to be redressed are not only structural but also cultural. When we talk about a clerical culture and maybe attitudes or practices or theologies that have perpetuated it, I was struck by the category that Karen Terry of the John Jay Studies on the clergy abuse used of motivated blindness. I found this helpful. I think in terms of thinking about how motivated blindness played a role in the cover-up, that we need approaches and structures that counter this tendency, this pretty human tendency to overlook bias in terms of our own vested interests, to insulate ourselves from critique or ignore convenient truths. And so I think going forward, transparency, real structures of accountability rather than buzzwords about accountability will be key to kind of moving us out to the peripheries and turning some of that teaching inward on our own.
And we need the grace of time. You know, it can't happen overnight. Mike, you had mentioned just a few minutes ago that in the corporate world, or it could take 2 to 3 years to change a company culture in a business. I mean, that's even quick, but it's the church.
That's a very new, that's a relatively young organization.
Okay, yeah, because that seemed quick, but the church, you know.
We're talking about organizations that are like 100 years old. This is a magnitude higher.
Right.
We're talking, it'll take who knows? No one's done it.
Can you talk a little bit more about changing the culture of the church, and then also, as Kristen mentioned, a little bit about power?
Sure. And then if we have time,
Clericalism.
we'll talk about trust.
Yes, yes, trust is important.
So culturally, the issue, as I mentioned before, is how do you change the culture of a 2,000+ organization? Right. I think the first thing you have to start to do is you have to have a vision for where you're going to go. And how do you get there? And I think we're trying to figure this out. I think it can't simply come from the top of the hierarchy. I think it needs to be more inclusive. But the first thing and I think when we think about where do we go forward, I think the temptation is to look for the future. But I think about it. If somebody tells you, you've been messing up for a long time, change. Most people's response are going to be, no. Like, who are you to come tell me how I'm going to change? So I think really effective change often comes from reinterpreting your past. Let me give you an example. I am terrified to do this because I am not a theologian, but I'll give you my take on it as a lay Catholic. But I'll take the notion of women in the church. When I was growing up, there was almost nothing about how women were important in the early church. I hear much more of that now. I think that is possibly seeding for hopefully bigger changes. I'm hoping that this is going to seed change for more involvement of women in the church. And so what it does is it says, well, this is how we used to be. So we go back to the early church. This is how we used to be. This is who we really are. Let's get back to that. It's a much more, I think, both psychologically safe and psychologically empowering way to think about change than to say, you really messed up and you've been messing up for a long time. Here's what you've done wrong, and abandon everything. Because I think people don't handle that well. So that's the first part. First, let's come up with a vision. Then you need to figure out what are the levers of cultural change, and there are 4 of them. First is selection, getting people into the organization, and getting people. When I say into the organization, I'm going to say particularly the talking to the hierarchy and talking to the more institutional structures. We talked about the church is changing demographically. I think one really important thing is to get more women involved, the voice in their church. And so that's all part of the selection thing. If you don't have people there talking, they can't contribute. So that's number one. Number two, you have to change how people are trained. We talked a little bit about seminarian training, but I think it involves training from that point or before. You have to change how people are socialized and people trained. What kind of values do you want, and what kind of things how do you want people to change? Third thing is changing reinforcement structures. So what do you punish? What do you reward? And I think just touching briefly on power, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but if you think about, especially for priests, and I think priests are in a tough bind. There are a lot of really good priests. They're doing a lot of really good things. And I think sometimes we essentially paint everybody with the same brush. But think about how difficult it would be if I'm a priest and I saw a fellow priest do something wrong. Well, for a priest, the church is almost a total institution. It gives me my paycheck, it's my housing, it's my family, it provides my food. So it's real. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to whistleblow, when we talk in the corporate, about someone doing something wrong? Because if you get kicked out, both kicking out a friend of yours or yourself if you're causing trouble, I think it's tough for us to think about it because most of us don't live in total institutions. So I think how it's structured, I think, is really difficult. We have to change rewards and punishments. And then the last thing is there needs to be a change in leadership because you have to model it from the top. We're not going to change anything with talk. We have to actually have some action. I think now, if you don't mind, I'll just briefly transition to trust. Trust comes, if you think about how trust comes, from competence and then character. Character is benevolence, or people kind, and integrity. Do people stay with essentially, are their actions match their values or their words? And right now, I think we're in a part where, because of the missteps of the church, people are starting to really doubt the character of the church, not so much the competence of the church. I think if we had taken this crisis earlier, I think so one of the research finds it's more effective to apologize for a competence mistake because you can change competence and you can learn. If it's a character based, people don't think you can change very often. And my worry is that we're moving much more towards characterological explanations of how the church is acting. And so excuses like, and not excuses like, this is the way it used to be done, or, we trusted the psychologist when we told them it was okay to put people back in, into the mainstream. I think I think we're moving beyond that. I think the church has to really, Kristen said, be transparent, has to allow for accountability structures. It's hard to police your own. That's the other part of the culture, right? So you're a total institution. If only people you depend on are other priests, and that the only people giving you input, it's difficult. We talk about this at police, how they need accountability structures. Father Leahy talked about coming up with using the Catholic University as a model, the Board of Trustees as a model to help give oversight to the broader Catholic Church. So all these things I think are critical for changing culture and building trust. They really go together. They're two questions, but they really go hand in hand.
And listening and being open to the ideas, that are out there. Let's shift to the parish. That's where we really live our faith. And there's so many good things happening at the parish level. And so many programs that are working, so many programs that people don't even know about. And there's so many wonderful people in the pews. Let's dig into this a little bit. So the American Catholic Church, built by immigrants, and now it's being bolstered by them. What are some of the things that are happening in the church, Hofsman, from Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, African American Catholics, Native American Catholics, where they're actually modeling Catholicism at the parish level?
It's fascinating to share the fact, for instance, that today a full quarter of all Catholics in the United States of America are immigrants, which to many people sounds like the big news because we left behind the immigrant church. We were the immigrant church in the 19th century and the early 20th century, but as a matter of fact, this immigrant church is a very young church as well, you know. I mean, the average age of white Catholics in the United States is 55. The average age of Hispanics in this country is 29. So I always say, who's having the kids, you know? And that's important for us to keep in mind because 60% of all Catholics in the United States of America under the age of 18 are Hispanic. Just to know, so we already know what the present looks like and what that future looks like. And we begin to see this dynamic, those changes at the parish level. What are Hispanics, African Americans, Black Catholics who are immigrants and children of immigrants, Asian Catholics bringing to parish life? The first thing that I would say, Karen, is youth. They're bringing, most young Catholics in this country are either Hispanic, Black, Asian. We also, they are bringing a renewed sense of Catholicism that is fueled by a spirituality that is carried by popular Catholicism. A lot of devotional life in this country that gave life to Germans and the Irish and Italian Catholics and many and French Canadian Catholics, through devotions and so forth, somehow was left behind by one or two generations. But it's coming back, strongly. For instance, on Good Friday, the Via Crucis, the Way of the Cross, live, reenactments of this, Marian devotions. Until 20 years ago, the most popular devotion to Mary in this country was the Immaculate Conception. Today is Our Lady of Guadalupe, So it is changing, it is transforming, and I think it's also bringing this new life, a new spirituality, and also youth. However, I gotta say something, that unfortunately, a lot of young Catholics who are from these groups that are transforming the church at the grassroots level are quickly catching up to other Catholics and are leaving the church, and are quickly transforming. And we need to do something. We need to shift our attention. How? Catholic schools, youth ministry, Catholic colleges and universities, better ways of doing ministry. But I think that, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, in all the research that they have done, indicate that Hispanics, have the best retention the best retention rate when it comes to religious self-affiliation, and by that they mean Roman Catholicism. So let's take advantage of that. Sometimes it worries me, Karen, that we get overly concerned about campaigns like Catholics Come Home, which I love, and everybody says, yes, we want to go after those Catholics who left. But we are not paying attention to those Catholics who are with us, and many of them happen to be Spanish-speaking or Vietnamese-speaking. They happen to be, Creole-speaking, Brazilian-speaking, Portuguese-speaking. So I think that that's the energy. And one last thing, you're right, a lot happens in parish life, but let's keep in mind that 75% of Catholics in this country don't go to church on a regular basis, So yes, it is churches and a lot of's happening there, but also we need to look at what's happening outside of our parishes.
So each one of you is very invested and very involved in your parish. Can you speak to some programs that are working in your parish, or programs that you've been involved in that are really helping the parish and in turn helping the church? Sure.
Let me. I serve at St. Patrick Parish in Lawrence, as I mentioned earlier, and something that
they have the hospitality.
Absolutely.
They practice.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, and the one big miracle that I share almost everywhere and constantly write about it is, we are a trilingual community, English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And the community, like every multicultural community, there are tensions, because, people are constantly negotiating and struggle and so forth. But I remember that more than 10 years ago, our community asked, instead of fighting whether we are going to speak English or Spanish or Vietnamese, let's ask ourselves, what are the biggest needs that we have? And we discovered that the biggest need was hunger, in the city of Lawrence. 2 out of 3 children in the city of Lawrence go to bed with only 1 meal a day. And we said, we as a church, instead of fighting for what's the best language or the best culture or the best way of doing things, what about if we just go and meet the needs of those people who are hungry? And we built a meal center. Every single day we serve 500 meals, 500 meals. And it's not only immigrants who go to eat there, people from all sorts of life. And I think that has pulled the community together, finding those dynamics. In the Latino tradition, particularly in the Hispanic tradition, there are 3 words that I love, They call them misa, mesa, musa. And, misa, celebrate together. And we say, mesa, let's eat together. Let's have fiesta together. Musa, that's pretty much, let's look at the arts, And I think that those are dynamics that I see in this, and not only in my parish, but also in many of the multicultural parishes, which in the United States of America is about 40% of all parishes.
Also to speak to Father Paul O'Brien, and just a remarkable man and what he has done with that parish, and also to the incredible priests that are out there that are they're walking the walk every day.
And the lay ministers.
The lay ministers
there.
And that's all about commitment and community and coming together and working as one. Kristen?
Sure. I would name a few initiatives here at St. Ignatius Parish. A couple of us started it's kind of a mini Professors in the Pews, if I think about it. It was bringing our gifts, like Mike said, to parents of folks in faith formation classes. So we met, and we might have professors from the STM talk about understanding scripture. Andrew Davis came, or professors from Holy Cross. Or my husband spoke about what the Catholic Church teaches about other faith traditions to help respond to needs of parents raising kids in an interfaith family. So that's been great, but it also became a place, certainly for peers to share their gifts, like you were saying, for parents to wrestle honestly with their questions, their fears. My kid's going off to college, I can no longer be in control over what she or he, the decisions that they make, and even disappointments. So I think it's been faith formation, but not just information dissemination, and showing them they can bring their whole selves to church, that it's a place of celebration, as you say, but it can also be a place to kind of share honestly. Another promising initiative just now getting off the ground is a lay preaching council. So one of the doctoral candidates at the STM, Stefano Montero, has started a lay preaching council. We've met a couple of times, and a group of them just did the Good Friday service at St. Ignatius, the 7 last words. But the other thing I was thinking about is my middle schoolers' book club. So St. Ignatius has a lot of different tracks for faith formation and arts-based, a kind of standard catechetical. My 7th grader is in a book club, and the books that they've assigned this year have been about refugees, about school violence, transgender teens, the natural environment, and they go one Friday night a month and they talk about the book. They talk about what they thought. They talk about difficult issues in light of these really well-selected books.
And they get pizza.
The free pizza does not hurt.
So.
Yes.
And frankly, the high school students helping lead the conversations are also a draw, kind of the peer-to-peer. But I mention that because I think it's a pretty positive model. I think sometimes just information dissemination, it's important. I'm a theology professor, stay in school. But it can risk reinforcing just one of you mentioned kind of the yes, Father, or the pay, pray, obey, older, obediential model. And it kind of fails to generate the act of wrestling with questions. And so I love to see that happening at St. Ignatius. Can I say one final thing?
Yes, absolutely.
The final thing I was thinking, this is not parish programming, but Mike and I both are in the downstairs family mass in Landon Chapel. If you do not have young children, you would find it very chaotic and hectic. But I was thinking on my way over, it's more than that. I think it too, the kind of chaotic, participatory, engaged environment, a different family hosts family mass every week. So early readers can try and fail at the ambo and then try again. Toddlers sometimes are dancing to the music on and off the altar. It's wide-ranging. What I thought of was on the way over here, we had young children reading the extended Passion narrative on Palm Sunday 2 weeks ago. And the young girl who's active in our choir, Amelie Martin, read the role of Jesus. And on one level, it was striking to hear a female voice using this, which is always welcome in terms of shaping our imagination. But for me, thinking about this event and the life of the church right now, hearing a very young but a very confident voice read a lot, it's a lot of reading that role in that passage, was really striking. It felt like a prophetic interruption in terms of what's happening, what we're learning more and more about victimization of young children in the life of the church today. And I felt like it was a countersign, not unlike the wider family mass community. And I just became pretty emotional. It was just very powerful in terms of young kids from an early age could be habituated to be actively engaged, to be questioning, to be participating, to be asking questions, to be reading lead roles in the life of the church going forward.
So it seems to me, too, that changing and strengthening life at the parish level, I mean, we have to think creatively, and we have to figure out ways to engage young people and then engage everyone. And sometimes that's a lot of different creative programming and what that looks like. And I think St. Ignatius has been masterful at doing that. And also, too, being open to ideas. We talked at several of the other Easter series programs about this is the time. This is the time to come forward if you have an idea and go to your pastor or go to the staff at church and say, I have an idea. I want to try this out. They'll probably be more open than ever, Mike, I know you have.
So one more thing about family mass is that I think the other thing that we do creatively, which I think people probably don't think about, is involve the children in actually collecting money. So people probably don't think about this, but most churches have moved to electronic donations, right? So when I was growing up, I would see my parents physically, or they give me money to put in the basket. Well, now most people don't do that because there is no, people are donating online. So how do you get kids to think about donating, contributing to the church financially? And I think, so they're not only just involved in readings, but they're the ushers, which can't say they always get everything exactly right. There might be whole sections that are missed. But the enthusiasm you get when these kids come up to do the baskets, it's just amazing. It puts a smile on my face every time I see it. So Family Mass has been fantastic at just getting people involved and thinking about those kinds of things. And another way on kind of transitioning over to parish council and governance things. So whether Joe's here, so he can back me up or not. We've been kind of looking at parishioner-driven parish, or more co-leadership. So the pastoral council is really trying to help our pastor to lead the church. And one of the things that happened in the wake of the latest, the Pennsylvania report and some other scandals rocking the church, is that the parish council got together and said, what does our church what do we need? So rather than just assuming we know what people in our parish need, we decided to have listening sessions. So for every mass, because I don't know about where your churches are, St. Ignatius is not associated with the school, so it draws people from all over the place. And so what ends up happening is we tend to build community around the different masses you go to. So family mass is one community, 5:30 mass is another community, 10 o'clock upstairs is another community. We went to every single community, we asked, what do we need? And that probably took about a month or so trying to get to every single mass. And we as a council went through, and there was 3 major things we found that the people were needing from St. Ignatius. One of them was community. The people are starved for community. We live in an age where we're more connected and farther apart than ever before. So we can talk to people, we can text them and we have that kind of connection, but not kind of deep face-to-face kind of connection. So that was number one. The second was more communication. Decisions get made. People they don't necessarily always need input on it, but they want to know why decisions were made. Why are things the way that they are? So communication was the second one, and the last one was clericism. So talking about more generally how do we build accountability structures, transparency structures, how do we get women involved in preaching, things such as that. And then to kind of communicate that, we ended up having a party where we invited people from the parish to a social event. And so that was kind of one way we communicated, but as the parish council, one of our ongoing missions is to go through and address the things that have come up in these listening sessions. And I think it's been incredibly powerful. And it's been powerful for me being a member, just learning to know other people from other communities in the church.
How are you communicating with the parishioners what came out of those listening sessions?
So the party was one. We're doing it through the bulletin. We do it through announcements at church. So those are probably the 3 major mechanisms that we're using. Website sometimes, because some people are bulletin people, some people are website people, some people are neither. So you have to kind of hit all 3. You have to hit the website, you have to hit the bulletin, and then you have to get the face-to-face, either having discussions at church or in these community-related events.
I encourage anyone here this evening and anyone listening via video, if you have an idea or something that's working in your parish that you think can help revitalize our church, if you could send us an email to church21@bc.edu, and then we can take your ideas and get them in our magazine, which is being published in late June. So we want to involve you and invite you in that conversation. We're going to shift a little bit and start to take questions from the audience. So why don't we begin? I know you pick some cards, Patrick?
Yes, we have 3 questions here, and they're open to anyone on the panel. First question. What can the church in the U.S. learn from churches in other countries or other organizations about revitalization?
I got the first part of that question, but not the second.
What can the church in the U.S. learn from churches in other countries or other organizations about revitalization?
Let me begin I just came back from Mexico, and something that we need to learn, I believe, is that in the United States of America, Catholicism over-relies on the clergy mightily. If the clergy fail, we think that it is the end of the world, But there are parts of Latin America, Africa, and Asia where there aren't that many priests, where you have one priest for 50, 60,000 people. So yes, you love your priests, but when they are around, we love them, we work with them. When they fail, we let them know that they fail, but we move on, the baptized. And I think that that's how the church is thriving. I mean, just look at the growth of Catholicism in Africa, the growth in Africa is huge over the last 30, 40 years. Almost half of Catholics, 40% of Catholics in the world live in Latin America, and in most of those two parts of the those 2 continents, the presence of the clergy is very small. So we need to start looking, at perhaps affirming the value and the importance of the clergy for evangelization, but also understanding that the failures of the clergy are not the end of the church.
Let's try to get through as many questions as possible. Next.
How do you navigate teaching the faith and serving as a representative of the church while also dealing with the crisis personally?
Oh, that's a very good question. When the grand jury report was released at the end of this summer, I changed one of my syllabi last minute. I thought I can't not address this in a class this fall, particularly one that would be taking up a unit on sexual ethics, even though I felt kind of ill-equipped, that I would have liked to have done a lot. It's not really my area of expertise, but I thought I have to address this, even if imperfectly, rather than kind of march through. So I think being honest, I quickly gathered things that were written about the crisis itself and assigned them, but I also had students do an in-class presentation on the history of clergy sexual abuse so that they would know that nothing was off limits. I think being honest with them, but also I think there are ways in which we kind of model our participation. Tonight is uniquely one of them, but I think there's so many ways at BC that professors or staff and faculty give witness through. You were mentioning retreat programs, or I think of Agape Latte or Intersection. So ways in which we're more than just professor at the front of the classroom. Mm-hmm. So I can remember the C21 event in the fall. I forget what month it was, but the panel that we had.
In November, Why I Remain a Catholic.
Why I Remain Catholic. Mm-hmm. So then really incentivizing that and then talking about that openly in class, I think was another strategy.
Last question. How can we rethink the idea of church as a community in which we give our gifts and not just an institution?
Mike, that seems like that's up your alley. What, can you read it again, Patrick?
How can we rethink the idea of church as a community in which we give our gifts and not just an institution?
When you figure that out, let me know. No, no. I think what we could do as parents, I think, is role model. I don't know. We all have degrees in education, but at some level. But I think that's the best way. I think if you wake up on Sunday and say, "Yeah, we have to go to church," that communicates something to your kids. I think it's a lot of subtle things that I think we don't realize we pick up on. If we are joyful, I think what we try to do is have conversations about what we heard at church, and the car ride back. We kind of have a no tech rule for driving back, and we just kind of talked like, what did you hear today? What was interesting to you? I think those help.
Can I say one thing? Yeah. I think that to address that question, one simple way is every time you say the word church, stand before a mirror, and that's how we literally, change that idea that the church is just one small group of people, an institution or a structure, but it's all the baptized. And I think that we need to own that, whether we are priests or theologians, parents, women, men, children, older people, but we all need to own our baptism.
I love that, just that image of standing in front of a mirror. So we wanted to finish at 8:15. We just have a few more minutes. So I have two quick questions that I wanted to ask all of you. One is, if you could offer Pope Francis a piece of advice, what would it be?
I'll start.
Okay.
You already have one. I would tell him a story because, we talk about parables in the Bible. I tell him a story about a group of people that crashed in the Himalayas. And they're trying to figure out, what do we do? Do we stay with the plane? Or do we try to march out and try to find somebody? So as they're thinking about this, they find a map in the plane. They say, we have a map. They take the map, march out of the Himalayas, and they find a base, and everybody's happy. So they're talking about, how did you get here? So we had a map, and the person looked at the map and said, yeah, that's a map, but that's not a map of the Himalayas. That's a map of the Andes. And I think that the thing about it, for me, the lesson here is sometimes any action is better than no action. I think there are times that we overthink that we have to have the perfect response to X, and so we don't do anything. And I think we need to start doing stuff. It may not be perfect, it may be flawed, but it's better than taking a year or two to figure out what's the most proper responses to things troubling our church these days.
Yeah. Amen.
My advice to Pope Francis would be, when it comes to insights from women and even feminism, do not be afraid. So that audience that you mentioned at the outset was 2 St. Patrick's Days ago with an international group, Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church, that I co-chair. And we had this audience with Pope Francis. We spent the week meeting with people in all of his different dicasteries, offering our collaboration and our services, and we culminated in this audience, which was such an honor. And a group of us from the board each gave him a book from our book series, just as a way to introduce different dimensions of the work we do. And the first book that we gave him was the first book in our series called Catholic Feminist Theological Ethics. One of the co-editors, Linda Hogan from Trinity in Ireland, gave it to him. The other editor is in charge of all of the Jesuits in Africa and Madagascar now, Father Orobator. But anyway, we went on to have a very long and engaging group, but I left audience rather. And we left, and he thanked us for our work and for our courage, but I left thinking he'll have to hold together that book with all the other books we gave him, the Moral Theologian and the Local Life of the Church, the Bible and Moral Theology, Migration and Catholic Ethics, the Environment and Catholic Ethics. In other words, I thought he'll have to kind of hold together that the same group empowering scholars in the Global South and really offering service to the Church is also kind of unafraid of these insights. I think if he could be unafraid, sometimes he's called it machismo in a skirt, or called us strawberries on the cake. But I think if he could think, I like how, Mike, you mentioned women in the early church. We just heard of women at the resurrection. Mm-hmm. If he could think of insights from feminist theology in terms of power or sexual ethics, or even broader images of God. I was thinking today of Hosea's image of God as a mother bear robbed of her cubs in terms of the crisis just now. So nothing to fear.
My recommendation is very straightforward, Dear Pope Francis, whatever you're going to do it quickly. That's just whether it's reform or inspiring or changes at the Curia or synodality or whatever you want to do, let's do it and see what happens. I agree with you.
As we close, the final question I was going to ask you was, what's your hope to share? But in listening to you for tonight and right now, you're our hope to share. Everyone in this room is our hope to share. And the ideas and the wisdom and the energy and the intellect and the love that you give to our church, all of you, is our hope to share. And so Mike and Kristen and Hofsman, you're so busy and so committed, and we thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. As I mentioned early on, we are mining these ideas and putting them in our magazine, which is coming out the end of June. Again, if you have some good ideas, send us an email, church21@bc.edu. The fourth program in our Easter series is next Monday night. It's May 6th, and it's actually ideas from lay business leaders. And we'll have Chuck Clow, Jack Connors, and Denise Morrison with us. And that, too, should be a very fruitful conversation. So thank you for your time. I see a lot of repeat guests here, so thank you for being part of our Easter series. This is videotaped. It will be up on our website next week. Please feel free to share it. All the other series are up on our website too. That's bc.edu/church21. Have a great night, and again, happy Easter.